make sense in a second, I promise. Part of that is because, as you know, everyone that I preach to regularly is 18 to 26, and 85% of them are male, and I will do anything to get their attention. So, and that's what I'm used to, so I'm going to preach to you guys like you're all 18 and male as well, so I hope you can pay attention. So that was the beginning of Star Wars, and I'm assuming that a couple of you guys have seen it, two or three of you? Anybody? Okay. I think it's terrible. No, all right, I'm about to get booed off stage. I'll stop. Okay. So the reason I started with that is every story ever, if it makes any sense, has a setting, it has a place. And the Bible, this is especially true. Because if you just have a story, like if you just have some characters, if you just have some action that happens, it doesn't make any sense. It's the Fast and the Furious, you know. Really? I got no laughs for that? Oh my goodness. You are not 18-year-old males. Okay. So if we're talking about like where Jesus turned the water to wine, Jesus was at a wedding in Cana. And in that situation, weddings would last for days. They were not like they are today. And it was important that you had wine to last through the whole event. And what had happened was they just didn't have enough. They ran out. And, you know, if that happened today, if you needed to get more wine, you needed, 5 things. You need a 10, a 5, a car, a key, and a sober driver. That's it. And you can get more wine. Somebody knows that song, right? All right. That's all you needed. But it was a much bigger ordeal, and it was a disgrace, and the family would have been let down. And in this situation, Mary comes to Jesus, and she says, Jesus, you can fix this. And Jesus says, my time has not come yet. But it happened. Whatever he thought, or for whatever reason he says that, I don't know. It turns out that it was in fact his time, and he turned water to wine. And every story in the Bible has a setting, it has a place. And so the story I'm going to tell today that we're going to go through, that we're going to learn from, is we're going to talk about Jesus healing the blind beggar Bartimaeus. So we're going to be reading from Mark 10, 46 through 52, and then we're also going to be referencing Luke 18, 35 to 43, because both versions tell the same story, but they focus on different details. And so we're going to learn different things from it. And it's very interesting, the different things that they focus on. So we're going to start by reading Mark 10, 46 through 52. We'll have that on the screen. And they came to Jericho. And as he was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a great crowd, Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout out and say, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. And many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. But he cried out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stopped and said, Call him. And they called the blind man, saying to him, Take heart, get up, for he is calling you. And throwing off his cloak, he sprang up and came to Jesus. And Jesus said to him, What do you want me to do for you? And the blind man said to him, Rabbi, let me recover my sight. And Jesus said to him, Go your way. Your faith has made you well. And immediately he recovered his sight and followed him on the way. And so if we look at our setting, we have a quiet road outside of Jericho. And it's not like the roads we have today, where if you're looking at Highway 97, cars are just whipping by. They didn't have cars. I mean, if you had some serious wealth, or if you had some power, then maybe you would have a horse, or maybe you would have a chariot. But for the most part, people would walk by. And Bartimaeus is doing what he can to make a living. So he has strategically placed himself on this road because people are going to walk by. And when they walked by him, they had a choice. They could either look at him and say, yes, I feel pity for him, I feel something for him, and they would give him money, or they would look at him and feel something different, completely move on. But either way, they had to interact. They had to have that momentary thought of, yes, I'm going to help or not. And so we have our setting. We are on a road outside of Jericho. And then we need to introduce our characters. So we have Jesus, we have Bartimaeus, and we have the crowd. And we don't know a lot about Bartimaeus. His name simply means the son of Timaeus. That's what Bartimaeus meant. We know that he was blind. We know that he was a beggar. So much so that the passage is literally titled, Jesus Heals Blind Bartimaeus. We have Jesus, the most important character in this. And Jesus is at a very critical point in his life, in his ministry. This is towards the very end of his ministry. He's headed to Jericho, and eventually he's going to go on to Jerusalem. When he goes on to Jerusalem, he's going to die. He's going to be crucified. And he's prophesied already, I'm going to die. But people don't get it. They don't understand. They kind of just are under the assumption, well, this is Jesus. He can feed 4,000 people. Jesus can feed 5,000 people. He can raise people from the dead. He can heal people. He's not going to have any problems. But he knew better, and Jesus felt emotion. We see that when he was in the garden and he was praying and he was saying, take this away from me. He was sweating. He was sweating blood. He was under such duress. So we have that going on. And then the final character is the crowd. And I know that I'm calling them one character because that's kind of how they act in the story. But reading through it, and I've read through it a lot, I feel like there's three main types of people in this crowd. So you have your true believers. You have the people that are there for Jesus. They are there because they love God, because they want to follow, because they're devout. You have the second group of people, and I facetiously sort of call them the party crowd, because they were there because there was a buzz around Jesus. There was something that they wanted to be part of. They didn't know exactly what it was. They just knew that Jesus was there, and he drew people to himself, and they wanted to be part of that. The people that they just want to jump from trend to trend to trend. Human nature doesn't change throughout the ages. These were the same kinds of people. And then the third group of people were the people that wanted Jesus to do something for them. And everyone wants Jesus to do something for them, it's true. But they were the people, like we mentioned with feeding the 5,000, that they were looking for a meal. There were people that thought Jesus was a political leader, that he was going to come in and he was going to kick out the oppressors. There were people that wanted to be healed. There were people that just wanted to be part of it. And that's really where we get the conflict from, because Bartimaeus wanted to be healed. And people so often approach faith as this zero-sum game. It's like money, where people are like, oh, God, I want something. But like with money, if you have $100, if you give out $20 and you give out $20 and you give out $20 and then $20 and $20, suddenly you're out of money. Sometimes kids treat us like that with love, where if you have 4 children, they're all vying for the same amount of affection. They don't realize you're never going to run out of affection. God's never going to run out of love. He's never going to run out of care. But so often we don't treat it that way, and these people are definitely not treating it that way. I'm going to go to Luke 18, 35 through 39 really quick and read through this. As he drew near to Jericho, a blind man was sitting by the roadside begging. And hearing a crowd going by, he inquired what this meant. And they told him, Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. And he cried out, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. But those who were in front rebuked him, telling him to be silent. I want to read that again. And those who were in front rebuked him, telling him to be silent. And as we've already talked about, Jesus was surrounded by crowds. I don't think people were worried about this one person suddenly making noise, affecting Jesus. People were making noise around him constantly. They were not worried about Jesus' mental health or not wanting him to be distracted. They were trying to silence him because I genuinely feel like in this situation, They were trying to get his attention. And if Bartimaeus got Jesus' attention, then it wouldn't be focused on them. But Bartimaeus didn't listen. He cried out all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And so the crowd's trying to silence him, and it causes him to raise his voice even more. So Jesus hears Bartimaeus over the crowd in response to the conflict and beckons him over, continuing on in verses 40 through 43. And Jesus stopped and commanded him to be brought to him. And when he came near, he asked him, "What do you want me to do for you?" And he said, "Lord, let me recover my sight." And Jesus said to him, "Recover your sight. Once again, your faith has made you well." And immediately he recovered his sight and followed him, glorifying God. And all the people, when they saw it, gave praise to God. And so we have the conclusion to the story where it's run through. We have a happy ending where his eyes were made whole. He was able to see. God healed him. And in this, really, I've come to the conclusion that there are 3 lessons you could learn. And they're the same lessons over and over again, really. His faith made him well, his faith made him well, and his faith made him well. But I want to get into a little more specific on that. Can you do the next slide really quick? First thing is that he asked for what he needed. I have children, and one of the things that they'll do sometimes is they'll say things like, "That candy bar looks good," or "I sure am thirsty," but they won't directly ask me, and they'll just kind of give me a side eye. And that's so frustrating. Because I want them to just say what they want. Like, if you want the candy bar, I'm probably going to say no. Or I might want some of the candy bar, and it's an excuse for me to buy it, and we'll split it. Like, I'm not above a Reese's peanut butter cup. But they're not asking. And we do that sometimes. Where sometimes we think to ourselves, I have this need. Man, sure be cool if God just fixed it. And wait for it to happen, but we don't ask. We're afraid to ask. Maybe we're afraid that God won't answer, or we don't have faith. I don't know the reason, and I certainly can't speak for anyone else. But that happens. And so one of the things that he did was he asked for what he needed. When Jesus asked him what he wanted, he very specifically stated, "This is what I need." The second thing, you want the next slide, is he stepped out in faith. There was a whole crowd trying to silence him. They were, "Stop, be quiet, shush, you the beggar. Jesus doesn't have time for you. He's hanging out with us important people. He's hanging out with the cool kids. Beggars should be silent." And he didn't listen. He raised the ruckus even more. When the crowd told him to be quiet, he got louder and did what he had to do to get God's attention. And stepped out in faith it's very much, it's a Christianese statement. It's something that we say. But he took action. This was a very visceral way to show what he did. And the third thing is that he didn't let the crowd quiet him. We always have a crowd around us that wants to silence us. They want quiet people. And it can be awkward. It can be really awkward. We were at the lake a while ago, and we were with one of my friends, and he had dropped, I'm going to start tearing up. It's such a good story, and it's not even a very good story. He had dropped his GoPro because he hadn't tied it down like he should have. And so it was in the water. So we're looking for it, and the water's brown. We were at Prineville Reservoir. And literally, I just stuck my hand down, and my hand went directly on it. And I picked it up. And it was exciting because, I found the GoPro. And it was an opportunity, and he was just so thankful that I found it. And I was like, dude, I literally stuck my hand down. I put no effort into this. That was all God. I did not work at all for it. And it was awkward, incredibly awkward, because I literally, I did nothing for it. I just reached down, pulled it up and trying to say, like, you know, I guess this was my opportunity to try to speak life into his life. And he just kind of looked at me, took the GoPro, and walked away. But we can't let the crowd silence us, and he didn't let the crowd silence him. And so that for me is the final point. The most important point at the end of the day, though, is all about faith. And his faith made him well. Everything that we've talked about in the last couple weeks is about faith. When Jeremy spoke, it was about faith making him well. And today we're going to take communion, and we're going to take communion in faith. And so when we come forward, I don't want this to be something that we do traditionally or something we do every so often where we just take communion. I want this to be something we do in faith because God's commanded us to do it. I'm going to read Matthew 26 through 29. And we can hear what Jesus actually told his disciples to do. And if you could have the worship team come up here as well. Now as they were eating, Jesus took bread, and after blessing it, broke it and gave it to the disciples and said, "Take, eat, this is my body." And he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he said to them, And when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink of it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink again of this fruit of the vine until that day when I drink it new with you in my Father's kingdom." And so as we take communion today, before we come up, let's take a moment. Let's pray. Let's confess the sins that are in our lives. But then when we do it, if you just want to come forward, file in the lines, come grab your communion and take it. Let's take it in faith, knowing that it is, among many, an act of worship to God. Thank you.